Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. We have lots of very interesting details, so let's start. And first let's talk about the, let's say, South Donetsk direction, but not the South Donetsk direction, but the south of Donetsk direction, to be more precise. Today we got the final confirmation that the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Pobeda. Yet we haven't received, let's say, 100% confirmation from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, but as I understand, they're going to provide this information today, and different bloggers, different mappers provide completely different information, but more or less, not completely different, but a little bit different information. For example, some sources are saying that Ukrainians have already abandoned the village and the Russians currently are doing clearing operation, but we received these updates yesterday in the evening or something like this. Additional resources confirms the same situation, that Ukrainians were left and fall back from Pobeda, and the Russians were conducting clearing operation, and we have one video from Pobeda. On these scenes, for example, we can see the Russian tanks who were attacking the Ukrainian positions in the buildings from the very close distance. This video was geolocated by the OSINT sources, and if we return back to the map, the Russian tank was attacking the Ukrainian positions in this building, which confirms that the Russians managed to bypass most of the village, and yesterday, somewhere during the day or maybe a day before yesterday, we start clearing the final street of the village by the name of Pobeda. So all these things are enough for us to adjust the map. And as you can see now, we show Pobeda under complete Russian control. Currently, it's very difficult to understand where are the next Ukrainian positions around Pobeda, but for now I have some doubts about the destiny and the situation of the armed forces of Ukraine, at least on this direction, because from now this is very difficult to hold this territory, and if this stronghold still under Ukrainian control, obviously within the next few days this territory will be abandoned by the Ukrainians as well. When talking about the southern direction, the Ukrainians tried to regroup. There are still a lot of job to do for the Russians, because the main stronghold is located right to the north of Konstantinovka. These are trenches that the Russians will reach probably within the next months, but maybe even faster, because if we take a look at topographical map, we're going to see that the Ukrainians currently have control just over the positions that are located in the lowland, and the Russians control the hills, and the Russians from the hills are able to see everything that happens in Konstantinovka, Novomikhailivka, and let's say Paraskovivka, Antonovka. So the Russians obviously within a day or two will try to move further, but very likely that before moving further the Russians will try to improve their positions on flanks, because if the Russians start movements further to the south in direction of Konstantinovka, something like this, if the Russians continue moving, obviously there are very high risk of being attacked from the Ukrainian side from the western flanks. So obviously the Ukrainians will make lots of attacks, and obviously they can cut and return control over Pobeda. So to prevent these attacks, first of all, the Russians need to move further to the west and to improve their positions and to capture the strongholds, this one, and this one, and after that the Russians will be able to move further to the south. So for now it's very difficult to understand what the Russians are going to do next, but for best performance, for best and better results, first of all they need to secure the flanks, obviously from Pobeda, not only after that to move further to the south. When talking about Novomikhailivka, today we got additional video from the stronghold itself. The Russians published the first video from the captured Ukrainian positions inside of Novomikhailivka. This video wasn't geolocated. The let's say icon was put on the map softly, but according to information we have, the Russians continue advancing. So the Russians currently let's say are pushing further to Konstantinovka, and everything is going according to schedule. We haven't received anything from Solotka-Vodian direction, and neither from Prichistovka-Shevchenkova, but maybe today we're going to receive more updates. Now we are moving to Donetsk direction. We have lots of interesting details and updates. Probably the interesting thing that today the Russians published the photo of Iranian squad, Iranian group in the part of armed forces of Russian Federation who take part in the special military operation. So this is just like a very interesting piece of news. As the most important updates from Donetsk direction are coming from Nivoyskaya, from this territory. The Russian sources published additional video of bombing of Ukrainian positions. As a result of that strike, the Ukrainians lost another machine gun, let's say, position. And if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of February, we see certain activity of the Russian forces on this direction. Just yesterday, we were talking about artillery bombing of the village itself. During the previous days of offensive operation in direction of Nivolskoye, we got update that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south east from Nivolskoye. So according to some sources, currently these territories under complete Russian control. During the previous days, we got lots of updates about further Russian attempts to attack the fields. So everything tells us that the Russians are about to start the ground operation for Nivolskoye, as well as the Russians just finished the battle for Pobeda. And this, of course, very important territory. And once again, the main purpose and the main goal of the Russians is to establish control over something like this. This territory will allow the Russians to complete the movements and the encirclement of the Ukrainian forces in Pervomaiska, and this foothold will allow the Russians to continue offensive operation further to the west with the purpose to cut Krasnogorovka from the main supply roads that goes through Zelena Dolya, Zhelana Druga to Krasnogorovka. When talking about Avdiivka, we continue receiving lots of very interesting updates. According to the Western sources, this information probably also was confirmed by the Russian sources and pro-Ukrainian sources. The Ukrainians, during the, let's say, abandoning their positions in Avdiivka, lost around 1,000 soldiers, and we're talking about those who were captured by the Russians or missed in unknown direction. So up to 1,000 soldiers just of prisoners of war, let's so call it like this. We don't have the real numbers about the losses during the battles of the previous days, but according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians lost around 1,500 soldiers. When talking about Lastachkina, today we got, let's say, the final confirmation, or we continue receiving updates that the Russians don't have any control over the eastern part of the village. The Ukrainians control most of the village, the southern part that located below the water reservoirs, this one, and the rest part of Lastachkina, the northeastern one, is in the gray zone. So there are no positions of the Russian forces. During the previous days, the Russians made few attempts to attack, but most of those attacks were repelled with the losses from the Russian side. Furthermore, we start receiving updates about FPV drones from Avdiivka. The Ukrainians very likely managed to bring some FPV squads to the line of combat contact, and we start receiving more and more updates of FPV drone strikes against the Russian forces in the village, in the stronghold. Now we are moving to Terny-Liman direction. We have additional very interesting report about further Russian progress. According to information we have, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions for another 500 meters towards the village by the name of Terny. And this is very interesting report, because if we increase the numbers of this since the beginning of February, just a few days ago, let's say on the 17th of February, we got another report that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over additional meters towards Terny. So approximately, according to some sources, that was the Russian control before we received that report about additional 500 meters. And if we calculate 500 meters from, let's say, the last Russian position, according to some reliable resources, this is something like this. This is even more. We need even to add more than this area, so something like this. This is approximately the 500 meters of additional Russian progress. And if we calculate the distance now from the edge Russian positions, according to the latest report, to Terny itself, the distance between the Russians and the Ukrainians is less than 700 meters. So it's already at the distance of even sniper fire or rifle fire. So we can say, and we can officially say, that 21st of February is the beginning of offensive operation and assault of Terny itself. So 21st of February is the beginning of the battle for Zherebets River, with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to leave this bank of the river, and to force them to go to the Ukrainian bank of Zherebets River. So starting of today, we're going to receive more and more updates, obviously. When talking about Belogorovka area, the Russians continue pummeling the area with the tall flamethrower system. As we discussed during the previous 3-4 days, the Russians used this type of weapon massively. The village was almost reduced to ruin. ruins. I'm not sure about the condition of Ukrainian forces, to be more precise, of 81st Air Mobile Brigade, but obviously their situation is critical. For now, the Russians haven't launched any ground operation, but obviously after such a heavy fire, it's about to start the ground operation with the purpose to completely restore control over Bilogorovka that was lost by the Russians during the autumn-summer Ukrainian counteroffensives. Now we are moving to Robotyne. We continue receiving some updates from this territory, but no update reports about the ground operation. Very likely after a few days of clashes, the Russians took a decision to stop, regroup. They managed to discover the Ukrainian fire positions. Now the Russians are bombing the Ukrainians, try to, let's say, to attack the reserves, reinforcements, ammo depots. The only interesting video we got from the Ukrainian side on this, since we can see the bombing of Russian infantry by the Ukrainian artillery with cluster rounds. So the situation there is very difficult. It's not something easy, and of course the Russians are able to capture Robotyne and they don't need 50,000 soldiers for this, but obviously this is going to be a very difficult battle. Now we are moving to Krynki, and during the previous night we got a lot of videos with flags from the village. The Russians established complete control over the settlement. Some bloggers and mappers says that there are still not the entire control, but everybody confirms that there are no Ukrainians, but the Russians still need time to clear the area, which is very difficult to complete under the fire of FPV drones. But when talking about the videos, we got significant number of videos with Russian flanks. Obviously there is no stable situation. The Russians still, for example, established the flag, and then they were forced to abandon their positions because of risk of being attacked by FPV drones. Then we got another video from another part of Krynki. Another Russian group of Russian soldiers established the flag. Now they feel themselves more comfortable, maybe under the protection of some electronic warfare equipment. And we got the third video of Krynki from another direction. Another Russian soldiers raised the flags, showing and confirming complete control over the village. So this is the situation. According to sources we have, the Ukrainians took a decision to made a decision to redeploy the forces of 35th, 36th, 37th and 38th brigades to Zaporozhye, to South Donetsk direction, probably with the purpose to stabilize the line of combat contact. Interesting details are coming from Russia. Also yesterday, if you remember, there was a meeting between President of Russian Federation and the Minister of Defense, and they were talking about the current situation. And later, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation provided us more details about the satellites that are flying above the territory of Russia and the special military operation. He reported that there are around 67 NATO drones, NATO satellites working in Ukrainian favor, and more than 260 satellites from all over the world, commercial ones as well, working in Ukrainian favor. And we see that the Russians made this report, let's say, during the same time when the United States of America provided us some details that the Russians are planning to establish nuclear weapon in the space with the purpose to destroy the satellites if they will continue working the same way. Furthermore, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense published today more details about the work of their air defense, and according to them, the Russians lost another Su-34 during the previous 24 hours, and this is the 7th Su-30, Su of the 30 series that was dropped down by the Ukrainians during the previous weeks, during the previous 10 days. According to information we have, some of those Su-30s were destroyed as a result of friendly fire from the Russian side, but it's not like making the situation easier. Obviously, the Russians need to change something, because if the situation continue to develop the same way, they will completely lose their air superiority and the benefits they managed to achieve as a result of clashes for Avdiivka. And of course, interesting updates are coming from the border with Poland. Today we got more details, more updates about the situation. We see that some Polish farmers made a very interesting post, very interesting banner on his truck, saying that Putin will deal with Ukraine, Brussels, and the Polish government. So we see that Putin is very popular in Europe, and it's very weird and interesting. And of course, the European politicals and Western politicians are very afraid of this situation, because this can completely change the entire the structure of Europe and the Western countries. And we have more updates from the border. On this video, we can see the Polish, let's say, farmers stop the Ukrainian bus and start making different bad things with the Ukrainians in bus or something like this. Anyway, this situation is critical and awful. And probably that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.